You're listening to Entrepreneur Encounter, the podcast where soft skills meet real talk for creative business owners who are building with purpose. I'm Dana, a Pinterest marketing strategist and agency owner helping wedding pros and creative entrepreneurs get seen without burning out.
And I'm Sarah, a business and team strategist who helps small teams and podcasters communicate clearly, lead with empathy, and grow sustainably. Together, we're unpacking the messy, meaningful side of entrepreneurship, from boundaries to burnout, leadership to listening, so you can build a business that actually fits your life.
Have you ever had a problem in your business that you just could not seem to solve? I know we've all been there. I'm going to allow myself some really very common transparency and say I have had problems in my business that just felt like I was banging my head against the wall. I've tried changing strategies. I've made another to-do list, another task list, another workflow list. I've asked for advice from multiple people, even my favorite AI tools. And maybe you even made a decision just because you were tired of thinking about it and wanted to move on. And yet something still didn't feel right with the problem or the decision itself. That feeling of being stuck can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you believe that as the business owner, you should be able to figure things out, like all the things. But what if being stuck doesn't mean you're bad at problem solving? What if you're trying to solve the wrong problem? Today, we're talking about problem solving and critical thinking and why sometimes the most useful thing you can do isn't to find an answer faster. It's slowing down long enough to ask better questions about the problem that's right in front of you. My goal is by the end of this episode, you'll have a simple way to work through those messy business problems without immediately jumping into fix-it mode. And coming from someone who loves to jump in with fix-it mode, it is worth slowing down sometimes, and probably most of the time worth slowing down. So I think problem solving gets talked about as if it's a very straightforward skill. There's a problem, you analyze it, your logical side takes over, so you find a solution, and then you move on. And that sounds great when we're talking about a math equation or something with a very clear answer. But business doesn't always work out that way. Like some answers or problems are pretty straightforward, but others are like trying to get two very different personalities to work together and communicate and scale. And that doesn't always mean there's a logical answer or a very simple cut and dry math equation level answer, especially when you're a creative business owner, because the problems we face aren't always neatly defined. Algorithms are not always neatly defined. Maybe you're not getting enough clients. Is that a marketing problem? Or is it your offer? Is it your pricing? Is it your audience that you're trying to attract? Your sales process? Does it have gaps in it? Or your onboarding process? Or maybe you're just actually exhausted and the problem isn't your marketing strategy at all. And maybe you have built a business that just burns you out and that requires more from you than you're willing or able to give in this season of life. Those are all very different problems, all thinking that it's marketing when it could be any number of those things. So there's no clear defined, this is it. No cookie cutter things. So if we misidentify the problem, we can spend tremendous amounts of time solving something that wasn't actually broken, or spending time trying to solve something that ends up making more problems. That's where critical thinking becomes so important for us as business owners, because it's not just about having good ideas. It's about being willing to pause and examine what's actually happening before deciding what to do about it. And I think that's where the emotional part comes into play, because when you're frustrated, uncertain, overwhelmed, or under pressure, slowing down can feel like the opposite of what you should be doing. And again, this is coming from someone who doesn't enjoy slowing down, so to speak. I want answers. I want movement. I don't know how to relax. We are learning how to do that. We are a lot better than we were 5 years ago, but it is still a process. And there are still daily reminders that I do for myself to slow down and to feel what's going on and to really take a moment to name it, which we have talked about in previous episodes, and I'll make sure that that's in the show notes. So sometimes doing something isn't the same as moving forward, is what all of that kind of wraps around. Is just because you're doing something and it feels productive doesn't necessarily mean you're moving forward. You could just be going on a treadmill going nowhere, or that hamster wheel. That's the best example that we hear a lot. So let's start here. The problem you can see isn't always the problem that you actually need to solve. And this is one of the easiest places to get ourselves into trouble. So let's say your podcast isn't getting as many listens as you'd like. The obvious problem might seem to be we need more promotion, more marketing, more visibility. So you start creating more social media content. Maybe you try a new platform. Maybe you change your graphics. Maybe you start looking at what other podcasters are doing, and then imposter syndrome is going to start setting in. But what if the actual issue isn't visibility? What if the content isn't connecting with the audience you're trying to reach? Or what if your audience isn't clear on why they should come back each week? Or what if the podcast itself has become too complicated to consistently produce? So you are putting in more work and it's bleeding through your content. Those require completely different solutions. And this is where I think critical thinking asks us to become a little bit more curious and start asking different questions. So instead of immediately asking, how do I fix this? Which I know most of us are guilty of, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're here to learn and we're here to expand. We want to try asking what's actually happening here. That's a very different question. And one is going to move us toward a solution and the other moves us toward understanding. And understanding needs to come first. This is something that I've had to remind myself of in my own business. This is something that Sarah and I have heart-to-heart conversations about this own podcast, because there have been many moments where I've thought, okay, I just need to do more content, more promotion, more pinning, more strategy, more consistency. And sometimes the answer really is just more action, but sometimes more is simply our response to not understanding what's wrong in the first place. So we add more activity without addressing the underlying issue. And now we're not only stuck, but we're tired. And that's a pretty expensive way to solve a problem. I have talked to many entrepreneurs who were in that burnout cycle, and sometimes it puts you in the hospital where you have to really slow down, and now you have an expensive hospital bill. So we want to try to slow down first and have that understanding first before we start solving, so that when we're stuck the next time, we're looking at what evidence do I actually have about what's wrong. We're looking at the data and seeing what it's actually telling us. And you can't always fly through the data. We don't want to assume anything or take someone else's advice completely. Like, everyone has their own journey and their own life lessons. And so when you're asking for advice, it's great to have it, but it's not like doctrine. It can help you in certain ways, but you have to still take the time to slow down and listen to the advice and see how it can apply to you in your personal unique situation. We don't want you to operate from a place of fear where you're afraid what might be happening, but what do you actually know? And that little distinction can change the entire conversation you have with yourself, with your team, with your business partner, with whoever it is that you're having it with. So once we've identified what seems to be happening, the next piece of critical thinking is separating what we know from the story that we're telling ourselves about it. And this one can be extremely uncomfortable. But this is where you start separating facts from feelings, because our brains are very good at filling in the blanks for us, and sometimes faster than we can realize. So if you look at a slow month in your business and think, oh, nobody wants what I do. You send an email and you don't get many responses and think, oh, my audience isn't interested anymore. Or you make an offer and it doesn't sell and think, I guess this isn't going to work out. I need a day job. But those conclusions may not actually be supported by the information that you have in front of you or that you have accessibility to. The fact might simply be the offer didn't sell the way I expected it to, and that's it. The rest is interpretation. And there's a huge difference between this didn't work and I'm a failure. Or there's a huge difference between this strategy isn't producing the result I want and I don't know what I'm doing. Critical thinking gives us a little space between the event and the meaning that we assign to it. And that little bit of space matters tremendously. Because when we're operating from a story rather than the facts, we tend to make decisions from emotion. And to be clear, I know we've talked about it before, emotions aren't bad information, but they're information. So if you're frustrated, that is worth paying attention to. If you're exhausted, that's worth paying attention to. If something feels wrong, that is worth exploring, but an emotion doesn't always tell us what the solution is. It just tells us something deserves our attention, and it shouldn't be the only guiding factor in the critical thinking process. That's the very important distinction. So when you're facing a difficult business decision, try asking yourself these 3 questions. What do I know? What am I assuming? That's where the emotion part comes in, or the fill in the blank part comes in. What am I assuming? And then what do I need to learn? That's it. What do I know? What am I assuming? What do I need to learn? And you don't have to solve the entire problem in that moment. You just need to get a little closer to what's true with the problem or within the problem. And sometimes that's enough to create the clarity that you are missing. The third piece is probably the one that creative entrepreneurs can have the most fun with. Once you've understood the problem and separated facts from assumptions, give yourself permission to consider more than one possible solution. Because when we're under pressure, we often look at the fastest answer just to get it moving so you don't have to think about it anymore. But the fastest answer isn't necessarily the best answer. How many of us have learned this lesson more than 3 times? That's right. It's a thing. You might think that you have only 2 options, stay or leave, raise your prices or don't, keep the offer or completely scrap it, keep the platform or quit it. But sometimes there is a third option hiding underneath the pressure if we slow down long enough to really think about it and look for it. Maybe you don't need to leave. Maybe you need to change the way you're participating. Maybe you don't need to scrap the offer. Maybe you simply just need to simplify the offer. Maybe you don't need to quit the platform. Maybe you need to stop expecting that platform to do something that it was never designed to do for your business. This is where creativity and critical thinking can come together and work harmoniously. Critical thinking helps us examine the situation. Creativity helps us imagine what's possible. And when we're in this process of problem solving, we need both. One without the other can create more problems. If we only use analysis, we can get stuck endlessly evaluating. I've definitely done that a time or 2. If we only use creativity, we can generate 100 ideas without actually deciding what makes sense. And that's where we're busy, but we're not productive. So we need the ability to ask, what are my options? Get creative with them, but then follow it up with which of these options actually fits the reality I'm working with right now in this situation. That's the part that makes problem solving practical, because you don't need the most creative solution. You just need a solution that works for your actual business, your actual resources, your actual values, and the season that you're actually in. Which is why I say, like, taking advice from someone else, they're in a different season of life. They have memories of maybe being in a similar situation, but all of those details of resources, values, season, your business do come into play. So you need a solution that works for all of those things. And that's something that I think is especially important for creative business owners. We are very good at imagining what could be very quickly. But sometimes the right next step isn't the most exciting possibility. Sometimes it's the simplest one. Sometimes it's the one that gives you room to breathe. Sometimes it's the one that solves only 70% of the problem without creating 3 new ones. And that's still a good solution. So let's bring these three pieces together. The next time that you're facing a messy business problem, don't immediately ask, what should I do? Or if someone does ask you that on your team, reframe it and say, what is actually happening? Then ask, what do we know? And what are we assuming about the problem? And finally, what are my options and which one fits my actual reality? Notice that none of those questions requires you to have the answer immediately. And I think that's important, and I'm going to say it again. I feel like I've said it a lot this entire episode, but it's because one of the most uncomfortable parts of being a business owner is feeling like you should always know. You should always be on with the answers. You should know what to charge. You should know what to offer. You should know what platform to use. You should know what direction to take any problem in any service. You should always know what's next, but you don't. And that is okay. Not knowing isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's simply the beginning of a thinking process, and we all have to learn different things. We're always in a constant state of learning and self-educating and bettering ourselves. So we aren't going to know everything. And again, that's okay. So here's your takeaway for this week. The next time that you feel stuck on a business problem, no matter what it is, give yourself 10 minutes before you try to solve it. Grab a piece of paper and divide it into 3 sections: what I know, what I'm assuming, and what I need to learn. Then underneath that, write down at least 3 possible ways forward. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be grand. They could be simple. You're not committing to any one of them. You're simply just giving your brain permission to see more than one possibility. And once you've done that, ask yourself, which option creates the most alignment with my business I'm actually trying to build? Not the business someone else is building, not the business you thought you were supposed to build 6 months ago, the business you're actually building right now, today, in the moment of the problem, and where you're trying to take it. That's where problem solving becomes more than finding an answer, and it becomes a way of making thoughtful decisions about your future that your future self will thank you for because you took the 10 minutes today to figure it out. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here. Being a good problem solver doesn't mean that you're the person who always needs to know what to do. It means that you're willing to stay curious when the answer isn't so obvious. You're willing to question your own assumptions. You're willing to look at the information right in front of you. You're willing to consider another possibility. And you're willing to make a decision without needing absolute certainty, because there will always be something in business that doesn't go according to plan. I learned that really fast in the wedding industry. No plan goes 100% perfect. And the goal isn't to build a business where problems never happen. Newsflash, the goal is to become someone who can meet those problems with enough clarity to work through them. So I'm going to leave you with this final question. What problem in your business have you been trying to solve? And what if it's time to ask a different question about it? Take a little time with that one. You don't have to have the answer today. Sometimes the better question is the first real step towards a better solution. If this conversation gave you something to think about, take that question with you this week. And if you know another creative business owner who's feeling stuck in a decision right now, and I'm sure we know someone, please feel free to share this episode with them. You can also subscribe to the Entrepreneur Encounter so you can join us for our next Friday conversation. Until next time, give yourself permission to pause, get curious, and find the question underneath the problem. I can't wait to see you guys next week.
You can now follow us on LinkedIn at Entrepreneur Encounter.
Thanks for spending time with us today. If something in this episode gave you a fresh perspective, share it with a friend or send us a DM. We love hearing how these conversations land with you.
And if you're curious about how soft skills can support your next season of growth, we each have more resources to share.
You can find Dana on Instagram at danas.desk.nc for Pinterest strategy and intentional marketing.
And Sarah at URembert for team development, business leadership, and podcast support.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose
and growing with intention.